This is a walkthrough of the balanced budget amendment proposal that the House Judiciary Committee is marking up on Tuesday, January 13th. So first of all, amendments to the Constitution require 2/3 of both houses to approve, and then 3/4 of state legislatures to ratify. And this one also sets a time limit of 7 years for the states to ratify if this were to be proposed to them. So we're just going to walk through it section by section, sentence by sentence, and I'll read a sentence and then I'll explain what it means, what the features are. So section 1, total expenditures for a year shall not exceed the average annual receipts collected in the 3 prior years, adjusted in proportion to the changes in the population of citizens of the United States and inflation. Okay. So revenue is pretty volatile from year to year. It bounces around pretty significantly with changes in the economy. And so this smooths that out by looking back at the 3 years before the budget year, before the year that the spending cap would be in effect. And so it smooths out those revenue fluctuations quite a bit. It makes things more predictable. You're looking at past revenue. You know what that is when you're building your budget. And so you've got more stability, more predictability. And because, let's say you go into a recession, the spending level will be calculated based off of the 3 good years of revenue before that. So it sort of continue on, which would actually make the budget a little bit counter-cyclical, so that when you have things like food stamps or Medicaid or unemployment or other things that tend to ramp up during inflation, you've got the room in the budget right there available to do that. So those are the main features of that. The adjustments, so in proportion to the changes in the population of citizens of the United States, that's maybe more specific than some people might prefer, but the population of citizens tends to grow along with the population of inhabitants as a whole, so that's fine. And inflation, is the reduction in the value of money. So when you adjust for those things, you keep the past revenue from being so divergent from the revenue trends, because when you think about economic growth, there are 3 main components of that: is population, or technically workforce, also inflation, and then productivity. So this doesn't include productivity, which would mean that this rule would create a small structural surplus over time. Structural means over the business cycle or over the economic fluctuations. All right, next sentence, still part of section 1. Total expenditures shall include all expenditures of the United States except those for payment of debt, and receipts shall include all receipts of the United States except those derived from borrowing. All right, that makes sense. You want to count all the government spending. It does not count those for payment of debt. Now, there's a little ambiguity there that's really interesting. It doesn't say payment of debt principal, it says payment of debt. And so that ambiguity could mean that it does or doesn't include the interest cost of servicing the debt, which means that this can target primary or full balance. And there's a pretty big difference between those two right now. It's much easier to get to primary balance. That would stabilize the debt burden. It wouldn't reduce it nearly as fast as going to full balance, but it's much easier to do half as much work, right? And then the receipts part of it, you don't want to count borrowing. You don't want to count debt as if it were revenue for the purposes of a balance rule in the Constitution. All right, so that's section 1. Section 2, Congress may by a roll call vote of 2/3 of each house provide by law for specific expenditures in excess of the limit in section 1. Okay, so there's the general rule that spending is limited to the rolling average of revenue, adjusted for a couple things. Now, emergencies happen. We have wars, pandemics, natural disasters, lots of things. And if you can muster 2/3 support in both houses, then you can spend for that thing without having to offset it in real time. That's just something that Congress needs to be able to do from time to time. If you can't get 2/3, it means that it's probably not as much of an emergency as some people might call it. So that's just your normal safety valve. It is at the level that is the highest constitutional threshold for legislative action. Some people want to talk about 2/3, but that doesn't apply to anything that Congress does. So 2/3 is also the same as a veto override. If the president vetoes something, then Congress can pass something with 2/3 support in both houses. So that makes an awful lot of sense. Moving on to Section 3. Congress may, by a roll call vote, provide by law for specific expenditures in excess of the limit in Section 1 for any year in which a declaration of war is in effect. So this is like the previous one. It's an emergency situation. You can do specific expenditures. What's different is that this is the normal majorities if there's a declaration of war that's in effect. It would be nice to limit this provision to just the military contingency, but a lot of members think that if there's a war going on, then that needs to be the primary focus. So that's what's going on there. This also does say, oh no, never mind. Okay, Section 4. Any bill to levy a new tax or to increase the rate of any tax shall not become law unless approved by 2/3 of the whole number of each House of Congress by a roll call vote. The thinking here is that spending is beyond constitutional bounds, and so there's no need to raise revenue. Not really, but if Congress needs to, then they should be able to muster a supermajority for that. So it's just making it harder to raise taxes than to reduce spending. From a policy perspective, no objection here. The challenge is, does that undermine support from enough members to endanger the amendment as a whole? Speaking of whole, the whole number of each House of Congress means all members who are currently seated. In the House, you do have vacancies sometimes, so instead of 2/3 of those voting, it's 2/3 of the membership, not including vacancies, and so it's just a slightly higher threshold. In the Senate, there don't tend to be vacancies that stick around for a long time because governors are empowered to just nominate someone or appoint someone to fill out an unexpired Senate term. Okay, moving on to Section 5. Congress shall enforce and implement this article by appropriate legislation. This is just the authorization to do implementing legislation. It probably isn't necessary. I mean, we have the necessary and proper clause in Article 1, Section 8, Clause 18 of the Constitution, but there's a number of other constitutional amendments that exist that have that language or something pretty close to it in there, so absolutely no problem there. And then Section 6, this article shall take effect with the 5th year beginning after ratification. Now, the budget's pretty out of whack. So there's a legitimate question, is 5 years enough to reach even primary balance? And of course, getting to full balance is twice as much deficit reduction as getting to primary balance. I've often seen proposals for 10 years to get from where we are to some sort of balance. So this is pretty aggressive, but if there's a couple of years that it'll take to ratify the amendment, and then 5 years after that, that could be doable. It's a heavy lift, and it probably means that you have to make all the changes pretty quickly, within a year or two, so that they can ramp up so you can get to balance within that 5 years plus the ratification period. One other note about implementing legislation. I mean, Congress doesn't really have a budget process that's effective, so that is at least adjacent to that, but you also have to define things and set up enforcement. Like, if Congress doesn't meet the targets here, then is there some sort of automatic set of spending cuts and revenue raisers, or a lot of questions about that. But this is the version of the balanced budget amendment that the Judiciary Committee is marking up, and we'll see where things go from there.